Hey there, and welcome to the Mei Lee Show. I'm your host, Mei Lee. Thanks for tuning in either via podcast or by video, because we do both. We want to reach as many listeners and viewers as we can with this new show. So we just launched the show officially. So we've released a couple of episodes, and so far the response has been great. I'm so happy to hear from some of you who are saying things like, I've been waiting for a show like this. Makes me feel really good. But also it really tells us here at Lotus Media House and Next Shark, the two companies that are producing this show, that we're onto something that really we see as a necessity to speak to the Asian American community and for our community and Asian issues and topics, and talk to people who are making a difference and who are pretty cool. So yeah, this is where we're going to do it. So we definitely want to hear from you guys. So keep writing in, give us feedback. Let us know what you want to talk about or what you want to hear about or who you want to hear from. So we're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Write to us, throw up a post. We're at the Mei Lee Show. So just look for us, find us, and give us some feedback. We would really appreciate that. So today's episode is a little bit different because it's actually topic related. We thought that we needed to do an episode on the growing concern about the coronavirus. This is something obviously we all know about because it's in the news constantly and people are talking about it. People are worried about it. And there's so many misconceptions about the mystery virus, of course, because there's not a lot known about it and it seems to be spreading and expanding. And from a medical and health point of view, of course, it's a big deal. So we want to be able to answer some questions and find out some more information for ourselves. But also what it's triggering is something very negative that does affect the Asian community all over the world, actually. And it's this growing xenophobia against Chinese, but also Asians, because people are becoming so fearful that Asians are carrying this disease that it's triggering this racism everywhere. You're hearing stories from Europe and Asia and the US, people being verbally and sometimes physically attacked for no reason, or because they're wearing a mask because they're trying to protect themselves. So this is obviously having negative repercussions on a social level because of this virus. So we are going to be talking to first a medical doctor about the virus itself and what we need to know and separate fact from fiction. But then we're also going to be talking to a psychologist who is Chinese American professor to talk about this xenophobia and how it's affecting people and how it's affecting people psychologically. So let's first get to the news of the coronavirus, at least what we know today. And please keep in mind that this information changes almost by the minute because, again, this is a fast-changing story. So it's February 6th right now, and so this is what we know right now. There have been 28,275 cases so far, 565 deaths around the world. Now, all of those deaths have happened in mainland China except for two. The other two were in the Philippines and Hong Kong. It has now spread, the coronavirus has spread to more than 25 countries, including the US. There have been a lot of evacuations taking place, American citizens being flown back to the States, but then they're having to be quarantined in military bases just to make sure that they're not carriers of the virus. So that's not a comfortable situation for them. And there's two cruise ships now that are on lockdown, one in Japan and one in Hong Kong, a total of 7,300 passengers. They're being quarantined on two ships for 2 weeks to make sure that they're in the clear. So that definitely is not a great situation for those passengers. 2 weeks on a cruise ship, kind of holed up in their cabins, not able to really do much. So that's not a great situation. Now, the WHO, the World Health Organization, today, they announced that they were going to hold a forum, a global forum on February 11th and 12th in Geneva. They're going to gather researchers, top innovators, obviously, to come together to talk about the coronavirus, vaccines, how to diagnose, how to treat, et cetera, et cetera. So that's going to be taking place next week. So, again, this is a fast-moving story, fast-moving situation where, up to the minute, people are trying to cover this, all the different news organizations. So, you may have one data point 1 minute, and then the next hour it's going to change. But we decided to, at least let's do a show to talk about what's happening and what we can do about it. Okay, well, joining me now is Dr. Gregory Moran. He is Vice Chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Allevue UCLA Medical Center. He is triple boarded in emergency medicine, internal medicine, and infectious disease. So he is definitely the guy to talk to. Dr. Moran, thank you so much for joining the show.
Nice to be here.
Well, let's just cut to the chase here. Coronavirus. People are kind of freaking out about this. So, you're seeing it on the media every day. They're updating things by the minute. Numbers keep on changing. So is it as bad as it seems?
Probably not.
Okay.
I think that's probably the best answer I could give right now. And you're right. There is a lot of hype about it. And I think people are freaking out probably. Well, they're certainly freaking out disproportionate to what the current threat is here in the United States. Right now, the threat to any individual in the United States is exceedingly low. We've had one person-to-person transmission documented thus far in the U.S., but it's certainly not becoming widespread. This virus is not as highly contagious as something like measles, for example. So we are able to contain it with pretty basic infection control precautions. Right now it is, as you said, a pretty dynamic situation. The numbers are changing all the time. What we're saying now is probably already out of date in terms of the numbers and things.
Yeah, because it's literally being updated almost by the minute, or by news organizations, by the CDC. So it's hard to keep track of it, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, I checked about an hour before on the World Health Organization site, and the numbers went up by several thousand worldwide in that time. So, things are changing.
Does that surprise you? It seems like these numbers spike, and that does sound alarm bells to a lot of folks. It's like, wow, how could these numbers spike so quickly? So what does that tell you about this particular virus?
Well, we know that viruses, that's where the term going viral comes from, because that's how viruses spread. When, one person spreads it to multiple people who can then spread it to multiple other people. There's a couple of things going on here. Part of it probably is that it truly is spreading among people. Part of it is that there are more people being tested now, and some of these testing reports are coming in from broader areas now. So sometimes we'll see, probably this spike of several thousand in a few hours was not that several thousand people were necessarily infected in the last few hours. It was more the reports come in sort of piecemeal like that.
Right.
But this is a virus that can spread between people. We know that. We don't know a lot about the strict details of how it spread.
Right.
Most coronaviruses are spread by what we call droplet spread, which is similar to flu and common colds and things like that, which is really requires close contact, coughing, sneezing. Very often somebody sneezes or coughs into their hand. They've got some virus on their hand. They shake hands with somebody or something like that. That other person then rubs their nose and it's passed that way, either by somebody coughing or sneezing when somebody's right next to them, or hand to hand by direct contact. But most coronaviruses, and actually there are many coronaviruses which are very, very common. Everybody listening has had coronavirus multiple times in their lives.
Oh, really?
It is one of the most common causes of the common cold. About a third of all common colds are caused by a coronavirus.
Wow.
They are very common, but there are certain coronaviruses that are different, that behave differently, and that can cause more severe illness. We have a couple of episodes in the last few years. There was the SARS, you may recall.
Yep.
That was from, that was like 17, 18 years ago now.
2003.
Yeah.
Yep. That infected more than 8,000 people, and 774 people died from that.
Yes. And that was a coronavirus strain.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was also MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, which was also a different coronavirus strain.
Okay.
That also infected a number of people. And both of those, the notable difference between those coronaviruses and the ones that we all get all the time, were that they caused more serious illness, and they had high mortality rates associated with them, unlike regular coronavirus, which is virtually never fatal and usually just causes a minor cold, and then you get better.
So do you see, as the expert, obviously, and having observed all of these different viruses during your medical lifetime, does it seem like these viruses are getting more potent, stronger, more severe? What are you noticing?
I don't think that viruses are getting more potent and stronger and severe, but I think the difference between now and, say, 100 years ago or more is that they spread more quickly, because now people can get on an airplane and be on the other side of the planet in a few hours, whereas that was not really the case before.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the first big pandemics was the Influenza Pandemic of 1918, and that was because that spread quickly because of all the troop movements in World War I.
Right.
And, that was a time again where that was one of the earliest episodes where there were large numbers of people moving large distances around the planet, because up until then you had to get on a boat to go across the ocean, basically.
Exactly.
And so now it's not that we're having necessarily more emerging of severe viruses. It's just that they're much more able to spread over a broad area in a short period of time.
Right. Well, we know that every day that there seems to be canceling more and more flights. And I mentioned earlier in the show that some cruise ships are now being held in quarantine with, 7,300 people not being able to get off the ship. So clearly transportation has changed, like you're saying, the movement of these viruses. Well, Dr. Moran, let's talk about deciphering between fact and fiction, because there's so much misinformation out there. And that's part of the reason why people are panicking, right? So that's why people think, oh my gosh, if I'm just standing next to somebody who looks Asian, I might get the coronavirus. But from a medical health perspective, what fiction have you seen that is the most blatant that you can dispel for us right now?
Well, there have certainly been some false reports of outbreaks in various areas. There was some false news being spread about an outbreak here in an area of Los Angeles that was just flat out not true. And that caused a lot of people to be concerned that they're worried that there's people spreading this novel coronavirus in their own neighborhood. So you be very skeptical when you hear any of those things. I think you're right. There is a lot of misinformation going around, and I would not trust things that you see necessarily posted on Facebook or other social media things unless you're confident they're coming from a reliable source.
Right.
And the most reliable sources would be anything from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention here in the United States, or anything from the World Health Organization. And you can trust those sources of information. I think for the most part, the mainstream media, the reliable national news sources, CNN, those type things, I think have been giving reliable information. But I would say the things to really trust would be CDC and World Health Organization would be, I think, WHO for good, verified, and correct information.
Right. Yeah. And that's what we need at this point. But let's talk about some of the practical information that, again, a lot of misinformation about how to deal with this particular virus and crisis. Yet I've even seen reports, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, it's not going to help. Now we hear about the hand washing, which has always been the case. You should always do that anyway, but hand sanitizer doesn't work anymore. So tell us, especially the people who are listening and watching this program, what is it they should be doing to try to protect themselves if they want to play it safe?
So if we have, for example, were to have a coronavirus suspect in the hospital, we would put a mask on them, a regular surgical mask.
Okay.
But what the medical staff would be using to protect themselves would be something that's kind of a higher level. It's what we call an N95 mask. And those are for a higher level of protection against more highly infectious particles, against airborne infections. Those are, for example, what we use when we go into a room of a patient with tuberculosis or something like that.
Okay.
So a regular surgical mask, like the regular kind that you can buy in a lot of different stores and things, they are helpful when somebody has a cold to prevent it from spreading to other people. It's not as highly effective to prevent it from getting if somebody else has a coronavirus, for example.
Okay.
But still, bottom line is we don't have people with coronavirus walking around the streets of the United States right now coughing and spreading viruses. We just don't. At least at this point, we are pretty confident that we do not.
Okay.
And so I don't think it really makes sense to do that. Now, wearing a mask.
I mean, Dr. Moran, I'll interrupt for a second because I got to tell you, I have people that I know here in the U.S., in Los Angeles, who have bought boxes of masks, boxes of rubber gloves, because they're afraid that they're going to get the virus. And so this is so interesting that you say, first of all, that it can't really prevent you getting it. It's better for someone who has it to use it, perhaps. And then, we don't have coronavirus, people walking around with the virus. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's that level of worry and panic that people are feeling here in the U.S.
Yeah. Right now, you're at much, 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 much higher risk of influenza and other viruses that are going around right now. I mean, we are in the peak of flu season right now. It is rampant everywhere.
Yeah.
Our emergency department is full of flu patients right now and every day around this time of year. So, and right now, influenza is killing way more people in the United States than coronavirus.
Right.
Now, certainly the per case mortality of influenza is a fraction of a percent. It's very tiny. And right now, based on what we know, the case mortality, like the probability of a individual patient with coronavirus dying, appears to be around 2%. I suspect that may be a little bit of an overestimate because we probably don't have a good sense of what the denominator is yet. In other words, I think the people who are sicker are the ones who are more likely to be tested. We know there are a number of people with coronavirus, this novel coronavirus, who do not get very ill. In fact, it's probably the vast majority of them do not get seriously ill.
Okay.
And so those people probably are not even being tested or not tested as often. So I suspect there may be an overestimate of the percent mortality with this virus. But that's still kind of an unknown. We don't really know what that is.
Well, it is also an unknown, and this is a little bit of a controversial topic, but widely reported and widely known that oftentimes the Chinese officials may or may not divulge the actual numbers, if depending on what they are. And there have been reports that have come out that have said that the numbers actually might be higher of those infected and perhaps even deaths, because they don't want that to get out. There are also reports that some doctors who were aware of this potential crisis back in December, November, were silenced to a certain extent in China. So things like that also add fuel to the fire of concern and worry and mystery as to how really serious is this? And if we don't have the actual numbers, how are we to even know how to combat this on a different level if need be?
Yeah, I think you are correct that there is some uncertainty as to how reliable some of the numbers are coming out of China, at least.
Yeah.
I think we have reasonably reliable numbers coming out of the other countries.
Okay, yeah.
There have been cases reported in other countries now. I think we're up to something like 24 countries.
Yeah, I think 25.
In which it has been identified. Yeah,
yep.
It's probably been another one since I last looked at it a little while ago.
I'm sure it's probably another one since we started talking. So yeah.
Probably, yes.
Yeah.
The thing is, right now, the best tool we have against this virus is to contain it. It's infection control.
Right.
That is the best tool we have, and I think it does make sense to be overly aggressive early on in the outbreak, because the earlier you try to contain it, the easier that is.
Yeah.
And, it's easier to put out one fire than to put out 1,000 different fires everywhere. So, just to use that analogy, it does make sense to, I think it is reasonably justifiable to put some of these travel restrictions in place, to have screening programs in place, to identify travelers coming from places where it's known to be. I think those are reasonable precautions that are being taken.
Right.
And it certainly is prudent to be wise in terms of infection control things. And, back to the mask thing, which was how we kind of started with this.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that they're completely ineffective.
Okay.
And it's not so much about the coronavirus, but most respiratory viruses are spread by droplets, and it's spread hand to hand. So washing your hands frequently is going to protect you not only against this coronavirus, but all the other cold viruses out there, influenza, a lot of the other things that are more likely to make people sick around this time of year.
Yeah.
And even though the mask won't necessarily, if you have a person with this novel coronavirus coughing right in your face, wearing one of those regular surgical type masks is not going to be highly effective at reducing your infectivity. In other words, that's not what we use when we have a proven case in a hospital setting where we have staff going in and out, where we really do need a very high level of protection for those kind of people.
Right.
But that's not to say a mask wouldn't have zero efficacy in reducing the likelihood of any droplet virus kind of getting in the mouth or in the nose.
Okay.
But it wouldn't be a super highly effective thing. And again, right now, the benefit that you would get from wearing a mask just around town right now would be against the other viruses that are actively circulating, because the probability that you're going to walk by somebody with a coronavirus who's going to directly cough on you is exceedingly remote.
But probably higher chances of someone with the flu.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's pretty likely. In fact, there's people walking around with flu all the time now.
And that's what we have to remind people, is that the flu is much more prevalent right now than the coronavirus is, in our community. Yes, by giant orders of magnitude. Yes. Right. Okay. If you could answer one, and I know this is a question that a lot of folks have and don't know quite what the difference is and what we would call this particular situation with the coronavirus, pandemic versus epidemic. We hear those words thrown around constantly when these things happen, right? So what we're in right now with the coronavirus, what's the proper term to even use at this point?
It would still be considered a epidemic, I believe, at this point.
Okay.
There are different criteria for, what would trigger it being called a pandemic. Okay. It may very well turn into that once we have widespread transmission in other countries, then that would make it a pandemic when we're having widespread secondary infections in multiple places throughout the world. Okay. Right now, it's still very sporadic. Right now, it's still primarily the cases that have been in other places have been people who have come directly from China or have been direct contacts of those first level patients who have come from China, where the outbreak started. I would not be surprised if this could perhaps turn into a pandemic, and we don't know how that's going to unfold. And to some degree, that's going to depend on, one, how effective our infection control and containment efforts are. Okay. And two, I think there's still some things we don't know about how effective this virus is spread. We know that most viruses of this type, most coronaviruses, are spread by droplet infection, which is more, immediate contacts. But there was some evidence that both the SARS and MERS viruses could be spread airborne, that they could spread a little more aggressively. It appeared from those outbreaks that there were some people who were what were termed super spreaders, some people who just had very high viral loads, high replication of virus, and for whatever reason, they, when they would cough or whatever, they were very effectively spreading a large amount of virus.
Wow.
Again, we don't know if that's going to be the case with this virus. There are differences between different strains, and those are still things that we're learning about this virus.
And the other thing that I think worries people whenever something like this happens, everyone always wonders, okay, is there a vaccine? Is there a vaccine? And what you quickly learn is that anything new that comes up like this, a vaccine can take a year or longer to come up with, right? So,
Yeah.
and they're talking about trying to fast track this right now. The WHO is, and they're going to have this forum in February 11th and 12th in Geneva. They just, talked about that today. But still, even when it's fast tracked, it could still be 6 months or more before anything comes out that they can try out, correct?
Yes, at least.
Yeah. So that's
It takes time, one, to develop the vaccine. It takes time to test it, to make sure it's effective, to make sure it's safe. And it takes time to ramp up production to make it that you can produce it on a large scale.
So no vaccine. And then, of course, they don't know, there's no real treatment. They're trying different antiviral treatments, but nothing really yet that seems to work.
Right.
So I think
right now there's nothing that we have evidence that it works. There are a couple of antiviral drugs that might work, and they'll be checking them. I believe they are doing some at least small scale observational studies looking at them now.
Right.
But as of right now, we don't have anything that we know is effective against this virus. It's really just supportive care.
So what can you tell the average person, the lay person who is listening and watching right now, to calm them down a little bit and just assure them that it's going to be okay? I know this is sort of like almost like you're trying to be a therapist too, but it is something that I think people are aware of, are hearing about every day. And so there is that anxiety. So from a practical medical point of view, what can you tell them? What can you tell us?
Well, I can say the probability that anybody listening to this podcast is going to die from coronavirus is extremely remote, like extremely remote.
That's good.
So, I think the more important things that you can do now are get your flu shot if you haven't already.
Okay.
Sure, it makes sense to do all those things, to wash your hands and, sneeze into your elbow and all those things to try to keep from spreading all the other viruses that are going around to other people.
Yeah.
Wear your seatbelt. You're still far more likely to be killed in an auto accident than you are from coronavirus.
Yes, very good advice.
So, just put it into perspective of what are the real risks that we need to worry about. May not be reassuring, but there are probably 1,000 other things that are far more likely to kill you right now than the coronavirus.
Yeah, I know. So when you put it that way, that is definitely the perspective to look at this because, plenty of other things that could threaten your life, of course. Yeah. And I'll tell you, Doc, I am so conscious of, kind of spreading germs and getting germs from all types of public spaces and all that. So I have trained myself never to touch my face with my hands. And I know people are like, how do you do that? No, I literally have trained myself where I don't touch my face with my open hand. And if I have to rub my nose or, my cheek, I use the back of my hand.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. That makes sense, and that could be helpful because
knock on wood, I don't get sick that often.
That is how they can be spread.
Yeah.
That may be part of it.
So,
and that is one other reason for people to wear masks as well. It basically keeps you from touching your own mouth and nose.
Oh, there you go.
That is part of it.
Well, Dr. Moran, thank you so much for spending some time with us on the show to sort of dispel some of these myths, decipher fact from fiction, and hopefully calm the anxiety out there that people are feeling about the coronavirus. So thank you for your time, Doctor.
All right. Thank you. Glad to be here.
We'll be in touch. I think this story is going to continue for a little while, but hopefully it'll get better.
Hopefully so.
Okay.
Let's hope.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
So what's happening with this coronavirus isn't just from a medical health perspective. That is obviously what's causing the panic around the world. But a negative result of this crisis is something that some people expected, some others didn't. Within the Asian community around the world, some of us did expect this, and unfortunately it has happened. And what has happened is a lot of xenophobia against Asians, against Chinese, but all Asians. So people are so fearful that Asians are carrying this virus that it's giving them license to be openly racist. We're hearing about these incidents all over the world, in Europe and Asia and the US. People are being verbally and sometimes physically assaulted, being accused of having the virus, just really mean-spirited and very hurtful. So we asked our Neck Shark audience to write in if they had had any experiences like this. And so we got a couple of comments, and I just wanted to read a few of them. One is this person said, kids at my school keep straying away from me because they know my parents are very ethnic. I coughed in class and the teacher asked me if I wanted to go to the nurse or go home. Everyone, including her, began to laugh. Even the principal has made a comment about me possibly having the virus. I personally expressed my discomfort and sadness with my guidance counselor, who told me, quote, maybe your people shouldn't be eating bats, unquote. As a middle schooler, I haven't learned to deal with this type of assault. I'm even too scared to tell my father. I have no words about this. This is horrible. Another story, another person wrote in. This person said, I've not personally, however, my Chinese boyfriend has. He's 18, and at school he was asked if he had the coronavirus, and his mom had to message him and warn him not to wear his face mask in public because a Chinese man in another town nearby got beaten for wearing a mask and for being Asian because of the coronavirus. We're hearing incidents like that a lot. And this is a third story that was brought to us through NextShark. My mom went to a pre-birthday dinner with her coworkers tonight. They went to a fancy steak restaurant in New York City. When they got there, they put all the Asians down in the basement so nobody would see they were catering to them. Wow. So yeah, that's just three stories of many that we received, and of course many that are being reported via mainstream media as well. So it's a scary time when it comes to health concerns, but now on top of that, for the Asian community, it's an even scarier time because of the racism. So I have somebody who is going to talk about this from a psychological point of view and also from a personal point of view, because she herself is Chinese American. And so, you know, as Asians, we can relate to this on a personal level. It feels a little different. It's scarier for us for obvious reasons. Sherry Wang, she is assistant professor of counseling psychology at Santa Clara University. Sherry, thank you so much for coming on the show today. She joins us via Skype.
Hello, thank you, May, for having me.
Yeah. Listen, Sherry, you know, we actually tracked you down because you were recently interviewed up in the Bay Area about this particular issue. And obviously you being an assistant professor of counseling psychology, you know, this is something that has psychological effects on a lot of folks, right? So it's just the overall panic, first and foremost, that people are feeling from a health perspective. But this racism stuff, that's a whole different level. Your thoughts on what's going on?
Sure. You know, the issue is, I think that the racism is not new, and that's why I think it's so important for us to name it. We societally have a history of racializing infectious diseases against people of color, particularly Black, Brown, Asian communities, and so this is not the first time. And so I think for us to not name or acknowledge the racism in this is problematic, because then we'll just keep thinking, I'm just protecting myself. This is an instinctual response to engage in self-protection, when actually that's racist.
Right. So, I mean, I get so frustrated when things like this happen for obvious reasons. I mean, because, you know, it's personal, right? So how are you surprised at all by this? Are you surprised by the people lashing out? And I mean, especially right now in our current culture, where this was already happening for different reasons, right? And, you know, I'll say it, for political reasons, this is happening. So this is just adding fuel to the fire, it seems.
It is. And I did expect it, because we had SARS before.
Yeah.
We had bird flu. And so this is not new. And I anticipated that this would happen. But the rate and how vitriolic it's been has been surprising. And part of that is social media, that we are so connected. And it's part of it is cyberbullying too. And so we are doing this interpersonally. We're doing it through technology. And so it's spreading at a much faster rate, along with misinformation.
Yeah.
A lot of the language we're seeing in our political administration has perpetuated that, right? So we have heard immigrants been described as invasions, filthy, that they are taking over. And so this fear of the foreign, the exotic, it really is kind of coming together in this way that confirms a lot of people's stereotypes. And so I think we've had this language primed for us to now just be like, and this is why it fits.
Right. I mean, it's like we're going backwards, right? I mean, these are terms and slanderous comments that we heard, the Chinese used to hear during, the Exclusion Act, right? The yellow peril.
Yeah.
Now we're hearing that apparently there was an incident of it publicly being said in France, where I think a commentator said this is the yellow peril. So again, it's as if we're going backwards in some ways, all because of this, coronavirus, which, no one argues it came from China, right? It developed in China, but it is, again, giving people license to openly lash out.
Absolutely. I'm not 100% sure if we're going backwards or if it's always been there. We just feel like we could say it overtly and to really be able to act it out either.
Yeah, no. Yeah, whenever I have conversations about racism, especially in America, people always want to say it's getting better, it's getting better. And yes, in some ways, of course, it's getting better, right? But is it getting better because people are tolerating and they're just keeping it, below the surface? And then when things like this happen or politics change, that stuff that's always been sitting below the surface is just coming out again, right? Yeah. I mean, maybe that's a pessimistic way of looking at it.
No, I mean, that's why we have microaggressions now, right? So overt racism. And I think part of the message that I'm hoping to convey too is it's really important for us to delineate which one is a microaggression, when we're being microaggressed against, and when is it overt, explicit racism that really needs to be notified to teachers, to supervisors, to owners, So I think a lot of this is knowing what is unintentional, right? So, I mean, I think it's possible for someone who's never been in Wuhan, China, right? Has never been associated with Wuhan, China, does not even identify as Chinese, for someone to say, hey, how's your family affected by this? And that person would be like, well, they're not, because I'm not affiliated with Wuhan, China. That might be, don't just judge me based on race. That's unintentional, right? I think microaggression, where we were targeting somebody on the basis of their race or what we presume to be their national origin, and is not. I think that is more forgivable and allows for a different kind of conversation than when we hear some of this really explicit stuff of like, oh, your people eat this, go back to China. Right. Something I saw the other day too was like the CHINK word is coming back too, right? Somebody was like, I chink, I have the disease. And so that is not a microaggression. There's nothing subtle about that. And so I think the nature of that interaction is qualitatively different.
Well, and also making it so mainstream and it being okay to say things like that. For instance, I read that Rush Limbaugh, who has millions of listeners on his radio program every day, and we all know that Rush Limbaugh is very conservative and has had his share of racist remarks, over the years. And apparently, with the coronavirus, he's calling it the Chicoms who are bringing it over, Chinese communists, right? That's his term for Chinese. And so to make it okay to say that on a radio program that is that popular, that has that many listeners, and then it makes it okay. Right. So, yeah. So it's the overt nature of the racism that we're seeing, as well as the microaggression that you're speaking of as well. You personally at your university, I guess they put out a letter to everyone saying that this is how we're dealing with it. And it was one of the ways to calm people's fears. So I know that that's what kind of triggered you into thinking about this topic a little bit more deeply, right? Are you happy with the way the university has handled this for you guys?
I'm really proud of my university. So I think KQED interviewed me because of an email I had written in response to the university, where they had first sent out an email to say, let's be mindful of how we are making these assumptions based on race and national origin, when it's really about linking, right, travelers to China or from China to Wuhan, China. And so let's be mindful of microaggressions and make this campus climate safe for our Chinese and our Asian community. And I thought, I am so lucky to be at an institution that will name this. And I wanted to add that more to say, but actually, this is not just an Asian issue or just a Chinese issue. This is actually an issue that's really affected people of color and just marginalized groups too, in terms of LGBTQ communities, thinking about HIV, right, and how much stigmatized. And so this isn't a one-time thing, and people need to know the historical context of how, SARS and bird flu has been an Asian disease, and swine flu has been discrimination towards Mexican immigrants, and so Mexican Americans and Mexican folks. And then you see where that anti-immigrant and anti-people of color part really come together.
Right.
Ebola, which is, anti-Black people,
Right.
West Africa, African people. And so this is not a one-time thing. And it's also then important to know when it's a microaggression versus racism. Because the consequences should also look different depending on which of those they are. So I really wanted to kind of say, because this feels like a campus that we can talk about these things, let's really talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about the psychological effects and how people can cope with what's going on. Clearly, there's an overall worry, concern, anxiety because of the health risk that people feel. Even though the doctor I spoke to, Dr. Moran, he was like, the chances of you getting coronavirus walking around here in the United States from anyone is so slim to none compared to just getting the flu.
The flu,
Yeah, exactly. But it's psychological. It's the psychological impact that people feel because of the media saturation, the coverage, all of that. But when it comes to now this other level for the Asian community, and this worry about racism. And I'll share with you, Sherry, a story from me. I got into a car accident last week. I was okay, but I went to a clinic last Wednesday just to get my neck checked and make sure that everything was okay. And at the receptionist desk, there were 4 different people sitting at the receptionist desk. All of them had masks on. And I walk in, and I swear to you, I do not overreact, but I swear to you, they all looked up at me. And I know for probably a split second, they're like, oh my God, she's walking in here because she might, be sick. And so I could feel it. They didn't say anything, and I'm not trying to be accusatory, but I could feel it. And I was asking myself, my gosh, is it me? Am I paranoid? Or is it that I'm feeling it? Or is it both? So, these are things that we have to sort of manage, in this time of uncertainty. So what are you seeing, and what are you advising people on how to handle, the situation that we're in?
Sure. Well, I think that's why naming that as a microaggression is important, right? Because I think the nature of microaggressions is because they're so subtle and they're so slight and maybe unintentional, right? Even on the part of the person who's doing it, that we are going to be like, is it me? Am I oversensitive?
Right.
Something wrong with it? And then we kind of actually curl into ourselves and feel like something is wrong with me for having the worst intention, worst thought about, the worst thought about somebody else's intention. And that actually minimizes us even more. And so validating people's experiences, right? Because the reality is we are all scared. Asian people are just as scared of the coronavirus.
Totally. Yeah.
Right. And so we are all scared. And yet being Asian right now, internationally, right, being Asian in the midst of the coronavirus means being scared for our own health while also anticipating racism from other people. Right. And that's trauma. Racism has been racism is considered an assault on our soul, our psyche, our community, our ancestors.
Absolutely.
The trauma literature describes microaggressions, right, subtle forms of racism, as little drops of acid that erode us.
Oh, wow.
Then where we just have nothing left. It burns into your soul. And that's microaggression. So imagine explicit racism where it's literally like somebody throwing an acid bomb on you.
Yeah.
You're scared for your own safety.
Yep.
So I think the psychological experience for Asians international right now is very different. It's very heightened. It's hypervigilant at a social level. And it's a terrifying time, one where, like what happened to you, May, you may be facing it and you're not even sure. You're not even sure if you're able to acknowledge that as a legitimate experience that happened to you. And yet you carry the emotional part of it. You still carry it.
Absolutely. And like you're saying, it is a deep scar for a lot of us. The listeners and viewers know some of them, not everyone, but I grew up in Ohio back in the 70s. So that was a challenging time in my life as a kid. And so racism has always been part of my life. And so those scars are deep. And they're lasting, right? They don't go away. So therefore, that trauma does come up in these situations. And it immediately reminds me of the past and wondering, oh my God, is this the same? It's like PTSD.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
And I hope people don't think I'm exaggerating, but it really does feel like PTSD to me.
Yes. Yeah. And the other part too is that it's not just other people doing it to us. We do it to each other because we live in a very racist society. We don't name white diseases. We only name diseases, right? And then exoticize them from outsiders and foreigners. And so we also, as Asians, we look to each other too. And we are also like, are you, so, we have these fears too. And so I think part of it is also checking our own stereotypes and our own assumptions and our own racism, which we are all subjected to, right?
Definitely. Yeah. No one's clean. No one's clean here.
Yeah. Not if you've lived in this society and have made it, are alive.
Right. Exactly. So what do you advise then in terms of dealing with this on a daily basis or in a practical way? Because again, when those scars are deep and those wounds are deep, it's I know it's not a matter of just saying, oh, it's fine, whatever. Right. So what do you tell people?
I think it's important to find safe communities to be able to talk about these experiences with. I read something online the other day that actually, it was upsetting. The ways in which Asian Americans, right, have been responding to coronavirus and the racism was described as rage tweeting. And that was really upsetting because I find that very condescending to describe a reaction, because rage tweeting makes it seem like you're blowing something into a big deal when it's not. Yeah. Really, we just described it as an assault, right, to our soul. And so in any kinds of situation where you're assaulted like that, you document. So I think for any time something happens where you wonder, was I microaggressed? Or you're sure that there was racism, document it. And for this generation, it's documenting it on Instagram, tweeting it, Facebook, Snapchat, email, write it down, but document it so that you can use it later on. There's potential for legal repercussions also, right? Also, I think at a larger societal level, people sometimes don't think of Asian Americans as minorities, as people of color who suffer from racism. So in some ways, this is a chance too for our community to say, actually, we are very much victims of racism. It just looks different. Well, and so I think...
Yeah. And also, Sherry, I mean, in the past, Asians have been seen as silent, that we don't speak out. We're not vocal. And so when they see Asians speaking out and pushing back, they're like, wait a minute, you're angry, or, they're surprised by it. But
how could you be angry? You're calm people, right?
Exactly. So that's why we're doing the show is that we're trying to represent the evolution of the Asian community, and that we're not this silent minority. We do speak out and we care about these issues. And if it bothers us, we should speak up about it and be more vocal about it. Have more empowered sort of conversations about it, like we're having right now.
Yeah. And I think that's if it empowers you, right? If it empowers you to write about it, talk about it, that's great. If it empowers you to provide psychoeducation about it, which I think is also a form of advocacy, right? Whether it's happening to you or if you're seeing it happen to other people, I think there's things you can say to people of like, actually, did you know that coronavirus is actually linked to traveling, from Wuhan, China, and then being in close proximity to people who have been to Wuhan, China in the last month, or who have been exposed to the virus. So it's not based on race or national origin.
Right.
I just made this a teachable moment for you. Thank you. And then put the mic and walk away.
Right. I know. Unfortunately, a lot of people aren't getting that message because we're still hearing the stories about Uber drivers and Lyft drivers being discriminated against, and they're not being able to make a living. But people are trying to respond in more positive ways. I saw a really beautiful video online, and I think Nextshark actually posted it today. It's a Chinese Italian man who, I think he started the hashtag I am not a virus because he was starting to get a lot of pushback and criticism. And so he then decided to go out in different plazas in Florence. I believe it's Florence. I hope I'm not wrong about that. But and put out a sign saying, I'm not a virus, I'm a human being. And he blindfolded himself and then put a surgical mask on and stood there to see what the response would be. Some people just walked away, but then other people gave him a hug.
Wow.
And took the blindfold off because they wanted to show their compassion. It's really worth watching this video. And it's a way that, again, this man is saying, displaying that it's like, look, you cannot judge us this way, right? You can't base our race on and equate it to a virus. So it's interesting how people are trying to express themselves in different ways rather than just lashing out or remaining silent. They're doing it in different ways.
But I think part of that is I think I want to affirm people for responding however they want to right now, because when you're victimized in so many different ways, right? That if somebody wants to curl up inside and just hide in their home and not deal with people for a while, and if that's going to be recharging for you, at least for a little bit before you speak up, then go for it and do it, right? Yeah. Do what's going to recharge you, because right now our bodies as Asian people are not being honored, and our needs are not being honored because we are not going to honor them because we're too scared. I find that the other day I was drinking something and it went down the wrong tube, and I started coughing, and I had this fear of, oh my gosh, are people going to think I have the disease, right? So I'm scared to sneeze. I'm scared to cough. If I do have an itch in my throat, I'm probably going to be scared to go to the doctor. Right. And so as Asians, I think we're all having to stifle actually bodily needs out of the fear of what those social consequences are going to be. So I think this is a time for us to remind one another, honor your body, do what it needs to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. I do actually consciously think about like, oh gosh, if I coughed right now in public, people are going to freak out. But a comedian actually did a skit online as well about coughing while Asian.
Yes.
And did you see that? He's like going to different, he realizes people are freaking out because he's Asian, but then he coughed and people are like, fleeing. So then he starts using that to clear the line at Starbucks or get a table at an expensive restaurant or clear a movie theater. And I'm like, that's really damn funny. So,
yes.
So people cope in different ways.
Yes. Using humor to cope. Joke.
Right.
The people who are your community members, your trusted community, to be able to joke and make light of the situation, because it is and scary and feels lethal right now.
Right. Well, I know this story isn't going away anytime soon, unfortunately, because, it seems like every minute the numbers are changing and we're getting more updates about what's happening. But hopefully, this will find a solution soon. And this panic and anxiety will dissipate a bit. But the lasting effect, we have to kind of keep in mind for the next time. It's like, listen, we can't behave this way. We can't let ourselves go crazy and in a panic about things that really, aren't really there, right? And so, but Sherry, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your insight. And we'll be in touch because, again, if this, depending on which way this whole story goes, we may have to talk again.
I don't love the reason that we're having to do this, but I think it's such an important space. And I thank you for providing it, May, for us to have an opportunity to really talk about this to our Asian community worldwide.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you so much. And you take care of yourself, and we'll keep in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sherry.
Bye-bye.
All right. Okay, well, that is it for the Mei Lee Show for this special episode. And remember, write in, you guys. Give us some feedback on either this show or any of the shows that we've been doing. Like I said, we're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and you can go through Nextshark as well. It's the Mei Lee Show. That's the the title of the show, and that's where you can find us on all these different platforms. And you can listen to this podcast and other episodes on all podcast platforms or the video on all different video platforms. Okay, guys, take care of yourselves. Until next time, bye-bye.